Greetings and salutations all. In this video, we're going to be talking about Positron, an IDE for data science by Posit that encompasses both R and Python focused data science workflows. Though this video is going to specifically focus on the Python side to the Positron IDE. There are other videos on the channel that focus more on the R aspect. I'd encourage you to check out those if you're interested. With that being said, one of the first things to take note of when Positron opens is whether or not your Python interpreter was detected, or even your Python environments were detected. To do that, you want to look up into the top right where you see either a Python or an R symbol. If we click on the Python symbol to launch this menu, we can see what the environment is that was picked and where it is located. So what we can tell is I'm running Python 3.12.3. It's coming from a Conda environment that's called DS. And if I go over here to where you're seeing ... I can see all of the different possible interpreters that are associated with Python that I can choose from, including the homebrew version, a Conda environment for Shiny, the default Conda environment, and then the global environment for macOS. So I can very quickly jump between any of them, though if I jump and the required package for Positron is missing, which in this case is the ipykernel package, it will prompt you to install the package as a dependency before it will allow you to actually use any of that functionality. So if we go ahead and press install, what we'll see here is the ipykernel being installed directly by Positron, though this does take a little bit of time. And just like that, the ipykernel is installed. So if I go over here, you'll notice that the top right menu disappears. And on the lower left-hand side, we're now no longer in this DS environment, but we're now in the Conda base environment. So this is one of the really nice parts about Positron overall. This automagic of finding and having Python automatically set up is huge. Now, if for whatever reason you don't quite have an environment or anything like that set up, I'd encourage you to go through the new project wizard over here on the welcome screen. So if I click on new project, I can choose between either a Jupyter Notebook powered project or a Python project. So I'm just gonna, in this case, pick Jupyter Notebook and then go ahead and press next. And again, here you're going to be prompted for the name of your workspace where you want to keep your Jupyter notebooks. You'll have a parent directory. So in this case, this is basically my user directory, and then it's affixed with the project directory. And if I go ahead and press next, I get to like the key aspect of Positron that's so nice, and that is this guided setup of a Python environment for the project. So here again, by default, it's going to try and create a new Python environment. You can either use venv or Conda. I've had a lot more success using Conda than, in this case, venv, despite the fact that Positron and Posit's development team for it suggests heavily to use the venv component. So once that's done, you can go ahead and press create, and it'll set up everything that you need, and you should get a new interpreter up above that's just keyed to that specific Python project. But again, I'm not necessarily super interested in that because my environments have been set up correctly to date, and it takes a little bit of time to set everything up. So I'd like to avoid having you watch that process. So the next two options that we really have for working with Python and Positron are clicking on this new notebook, which again is going to give you an option to go into a Jupyter Notebook for Python or a Jupyter Notebook for R. Or what we can do is we can press this new file icon, which is going to engage what's called the command palette. So here you can go and you can either mouse over different options, or you can use the keyboard arrow down to move options to move between file type options in the command palette. So here, if I press enter, I would create a new Jupyter Notebook. So for all intents and purposes, what we'll do here is we'll go ahead and create a new Python notebook just by pressing the notebook button. And with the notebook now launched, what we can do is we can start writing code immediately. We don't even have to save it. So here we can go 1+1, and then we can use, in this case, Control-Enter. Even if you're on a Mac, that just works. And notice that we get what the output is. We have a tracker associated with what order the cell was executed in. We know the duration, and we know the language. And we also sort of see in the top right sort of a toolkit for looking at the cell, which is being able to execute cells that are above, below, splitting code inside of the cell, and then a series of additional actions that you can take from copying the cell, pasting a cell, inserting a cell above or below, either code or markdown based. We can even just change the code cell over to markdown. So all of your usual sort of Jupyter Notebook options that you would expect are immediately available inside of Positron. So with that gently out of the way, let's actually make sure that we can save the notebook. As this is an early beta, one of the downsides here is these save buttons don't seem to be responding. So what you'll have to do is you'll have to use a keyboard shortcut like Command+S or Control+S, or you'll have to go up to the File menu, and then you'll have to go down to where you see Save. So I'm going to trigger a save prompt, and I'm going to say Command+S, and what I'm going to do is two things. First, I'm going to create a new folder. So here I'm going to say that this is like Positron Python, and I'm just going to go ahead and press Create. Then the next part that I'm going to do is I'm going to name this notebook Test Python Notebook, and then I'm going to just go ahead and say Save. So when we go ahead and we do this, you'll notice a few things happen. The first thing that happens is we now have a path to exactly where the notebook is appearing right underneath the notebook tab. And if we even mouse over the notebook tab, notice that we get what the path is to where the notebook is located. And if we mouse over a specific part of the breadcrumb that you're seeing with respect to where the notebook is, we again get a custom path that's representative of each part of the breadcrumb. Okay, so other things to take into consideration here, right, are you do have two buttons, one to add a code cell, one to add a markdown cell. These are part of the global toolbar, right? So I can add both cell types. How you tell what a cell type is based on what's happening in the lower right-hand side of a cell. So in this particular case, you have Python, and then in the lower cell, I have markdown. So markdown here would be sort of like, hi, and then what I can do is just hit Control-Enter, and I can actually make sure that there are no spaces so that it's properly highlighted. And lo and behold, I now have hi that's bolded. So if I go up a little bit more, right, I can here again sort of like import Pandas as PD, and I can go ahead and run this using Control-Enter. And you'll notice here, because I'm inside of this base environment, right, what has ended up happening is the base environment didn't actually have Pandas installed. So what I'm going to do in this particular case is I'm going to switch the environment by going up to the top right, and instead of using the base, I'm going to say select another kernel. I'll go into my Python environments, and then I'm going to select DS. So effectively what happens is the entire notebook and the entire editor now updates and shifts over to using this Conda DS environment. And if I very quickly rerun the cell, 1+1, and then go down to my import package statement, notice that everything now sort of works. Now, there's one part that I also want to just very quickly mention and bring up to you. Let's say that I start to define variables. So here, let's say I say x equals 5, and I go ahead and I run this particular cell using Control-Enter. Now, what ends up happening here, right, is if we look on the right-hand side, we have this session, and underneath session, we have variables. But when we define that x, nothing appeared. And the reason for that is we actually need to change away from the DS environment to the notebook environment. So I'm going to go ahead and try and find my notebook environment. So I think this is one of the issues that is sort of facing the early beta version of Positron, and that is sometimes these environments are not cleaned when we sort of restart them or switch to a different kernel. So that's the reason why you're sort of seeing a duplicate of these notebooks. But when we found the correct notebook, notice how we now have basically the value of x being equal to 5. If I drag this out slightly, you can also see on the far right-hand side the type of, or the data type that's actually associated with the variable x. So let's do one more thing then, just to also emphasize a little bit about what's going on. If I go ahead and I try and type x inside of the console, you'll notice that the Jupyter Notebook environment is actually kept separate from the Python environment. And we can sort of see this again if we go back over to where the variables are. And in this case, if we jump back into that Conda DS, right, notice you'll see here no variables have been created. So if I go ahead and I just say y equals 42 and I press enter, notice that I now have y equals 42 just in this Conda DS environment. If I switch over into that test notebook environment and then use this plus code option and say y and then try and run the cell again, notice that I can't get the y that was just defined inside of the terminal. So this is one of the design choices that I think the Posit team made, which is to try and keep the Jupyter Notebook kernel sort of separate from just the regular console. Maybe we'll see that change in the future. Who knows? Again, it's early days, but it's just something that I want to point out as it might throw you. All right, so the next part that I would like to actually do is basically inside of this Explorer tab on the top left, I'd like to make sure that this notebooks folder gets opened. So I'm going to go ahead and press open folder, and notice that it's automatically taking me to where my test notebook is. All I have to do here is just press open, and bada bing, bada boom, Positron refreshes. And what happens when Positron refreshes is basically I have to say whether or not I trust the code that's inside of this folder so that Positron is able to execute it. So I'm going to just go ahead and say, yes, I trust the authors. Technically, you could check this little box if you don't want to ever see this pop up again with respect to that parent home folder of Ronan. But for right now, I'm going to approve permissions on a per project basis. So with that being done, what's happening here is basically we now have to actually start an interpreter. So if we go up to the far right hand side, we need to click on that ... and then we're going to drop down, in my case, into this Conda DS environment. And just like that, everything gets started up. And if I double click back into the notebook, notice that the exact same spot was present. And what I can do here is I can just press this restart button, and every sort of part of the Jupyter Notebook kernel is just going to get reset. But if I press the run all button, notice that the values, the assignment takes place, which means that all of the cells have now run, which is a really nice thing. Now, I'm going to just gently hide the Explorer portion. Again, I definitely recommend hiding it quite a bit. One of the downsides with the current version of Positron is you can use this keyboard shortcut to open the Explorer tab of Shift, Command E. But if I use that same shortcut again, so Shift, Command E, I don't actually get the Explorer closed. So just something to keep in the back of your mind if you're somebody that likes to have a lot of screen real estate at your disposal. One of the other parts here to also note is you can clear all outputs. So just like that, I removed all of the outputs, and then I can go ahead and run all again. I can clear outputs again, and what I can do is I can run just the cell above. So there's a lot of possibilities in terms of executing code. All right. I prepared a few things outside of just this quick test notebook. One of them is actually a quick data analysis workflow that you might want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to gently bring in that notebook into where you're seeing this Explorer tab. So to do that, what I'm going to really quickly do off screen is I'm just going to basically drag and drop into the Positron folder. So on the left-hand side, I have files in one folder, and I'm just going to drag and drop it. I'm just going to drag and drop. And notice the second I do that, on the top left, what ended up happening is I now have the notebook exactly where I want it, and I can start actually running things. So here what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I will select the Conda DS kernel that has been set up, and we're going to gently start just running some code. So one of the first things here that we'll do is we'll run a download helper. And when we go ahead and do that, notice that after running this specific cell, what happens is we get that function directly inside of the variables tab. If we go down a little bit more, if you're not super used to Python or Jupyter Notebooks, one huge difference compared to R is the last value of the cell is usually always printed. So if you want both the first and the last value to print, you should use print statements, just like so. So notice that's print and then print. Now, there's a lot of other keyboard shortcuts for Jupyter. I've tried to list them out very quickly over here. You'll see that I make use of quite a few of them throughout the entire Jupyter Notebook. I would really suggest looking at the video's description and just going ahead and grabbing a copy of this notebook and trying it out on your own. Okay, so let's get to the next part, which is actually getting data. So here I sort of have this pre-set up part where the data is. If you hover over URLs inside of Positron and then hold either command, what happens is the string goes from being a string into a clickable URL, so you can actually go and visit where this data is. For all intents and purposes, I'm going to skip that for right now. And what I'll do instead is just run this cell. And notice what happens is right after I ran the cell, I now have the data set right inside of where my project directory is. Now, if I go down a little bit more, I can use automagic just as before, so %bash, and you can see here we have the notebook that we're in, we have the data that was just downloaded, and then our original sort of test notebook that you could see different parts of. If we scroll down a little bit more, right, we can really quickly start to run and ingest data. And what I did right now is I basically read in this local file into the variable penguins, and what happened is Positron's data session variable viewer picked that up. So now on the right-hand side, I have a variable called penguins, where it lists out, again, all of the variables inside of the data frame. It tells me the number of observations, and it tells me the number of columns that are present. If I drag this out a little bit, unlike with ours, you don't actually get to see, in this particular case, the different data types. Instead, you just get to know that it's a Pandas series. So if I go a little bit more inward in terms of the viewer, there's two things that we can then do. The first is we can use this magic command called view, which is going to trigger, in this case, an interactive data viewer. On the left-hand side, again, we can see here just the names of the variables inside of the dataset, but we also now get the ability to see string, or the data type. So in that case, a string, a float, and then also a string for sex. Now, on the far right-hand side, what we get here is we get a percent or a summary column with respect to how many values are missing. So here we're seeing that there's apparently 3% of observations that are missing a sex value in this data. And if we just gently start to look inside of this data set, I'm going to just sort of close the Explorer window, and then I'm going to drag that a little bit over so I can show you a little bit better. All right, notice that we definitely have quite a few not-a numbers. However, there are other not-a numbers present, but apparently I think the number of observations may be too small, so that's why we can't see it. Now, with this interactive data viewer, you can do a few things. The first thing that you can do is if you click on a column, right, it highlights all of the column, so you can go ahead and go and copy all of the column. If I didn't highlight the column, you could just select the column through that menu, and then you could go through and copy it, up to you. But what is really cool and nice is you have the ability to start doing sorting. So here I can do like sort descending. So that means we're going from the highest value down all the way to the lowest. And you can see that this happened because on the far left-hand side, each of the row indices has now changed. If I go ahead and clear that sort by clicking on the top left, clear sort, you'll notice that the row index goes back to 0. Now, we can also start to do filtering. So if we click on that 3-point down arrow, we can go to add filter. And what we can say here is we can request values that are greater than, let's say, in this case, 19.5. And if I go ahead and I apply the filter, what ends up happening is I now get all of the observations that are greater than 19.5. I can very clearly see what the criteria is. On the bottom portion, you can see the number of rows alongside of the percent out of the total number of observations that were able to be maintained. I can also go over to a new column. So over on the far right-hand side, right, I can go to where you see sex. I can go ahead and click on that go down to where you see filter, and then I can say I want this to be equal to female, which in this case, if I go ahead and I apply that filter, basically I have a single female penguin that's going to appear, and you can see down at the bottom, again, one row, which is about 0.29% of 344 total observations. Now, over in the top, again, notice that we have both of the conditions being shown, and notice that this is enforced as an AND symbol, which means that both of these events have to be true in order for this sort to happen. If you want to sort of show just the data itself and you don't want to see the criteria, you can go ahead and say hide filters, which is going to hide that filter string, and then you can bring them back by saying show filters. Alternatively, we can go back and reset the data by pressing just clear filters. Now, I do want to emphasize anything that you do inside of this interactive data viewer will not propagate out at all to your Pandas data frame. So this is just something that allows you to very quickly look at the data and just explore it. Okay? So let's go ahead and close this by pressing on that X, or you can use Command W or Control W if you're on Windows. So going a little bit more downwards, right, we can get 5 observations just by using penguins.head. And if we wanted like 6 observations, well, chances are we'd need tail, but let's say we forgot the parameter, right? In a case like this, we can pull up the help documentation by saying question mark, and then the name of the function. So here we can see on the far right-hand side, basically Positron's excellent ability to look at doc strings for the Pandas library. And we can also then see head also. So if we click on that, notice that we get taken into a new link. Now, I will point out that there are limits to this help system right now. Again, for some reason, it seems like the home button isn't working. If I go backwards, right, I get to tail. If I go over to head, I can move back and forth, but it would be nice to sort of understand where home should be. But again, early days, don't worry too much about that. So if I didn't have a help string, another thing that I could do is I could just sort of start typing, right? And I have IntelliSense that I'll immediately pick up. And then here, right, I think that might be too small. So you won't see the parameter itself getting displayed. But in this case, that would be n equals 6. And you can see that we have a striated table, which is being displayed directly underneath where the cell is. So going a little bit downwards, let's try and sort of see how Positron actually responds a bit to plots. So here, the first one that I have is sort of looking at a matplot. So I'm going to just go ahead and say Control-Enter. And notice what ends up happening is we get this very nice matplotlib where the penguin species are being shown. Another thing here is we can very quickly install packages on the fly. So here what I'm doing is I'm using an automagic command for pip to install plotnine. You can also suppress the output of a cell using %% capture. And next what we can do is we can really quickly then sort of run this plotnine code, and we can see that plotnine, it looks very much so like ggplot2, just with Python-like syntax. One of the downsides though is because of this from namespace import, you'll notice on the far right-hand side, we do have quite a few classes. So this session viewer is now getting a little bit more intense in terms of what's present. If we go down a little bit more, again, we can also use Seaborn. So here, what we're doing very quick is just plotting using Seaborn. So you can again see a lot of these Python visualization libraries just work right out of the box. We can also go into interactive plots like Bokeh. So here, what's happening is we're basically creating an inline Bokeh plot, so I can mouse over points and I can immediately understand what the value is. I can start to sort of create this selection, right, where basically the points that were in that selection part are highlighted. The points that are out of it, they're present, but they're more opaque. I can switch to a different tool, in this case the zoom tool, and then I can say zoom in, and I can look at a specific point, and then we can sort of go back to just the regular original viewpoint by pressing that reset. Now for Plotly, again, you have something very similar for Plotly, right? So one of the only things that I would say with respect to Plotly is you have to be very careful about renderers inside of Positron. For this example, I had to make sure that the Plotly IO renderer was set to notebook in order to have this figure show up when the code is run. But outside of that, everything just sort of works, which is really, really nice. I mean, there isn't a lot of custom code that is required to make these plots work. And then last but not least, let's do a quick example with Altair. So again, all of your main Python visualization libraries just work right out of the box, right inside of a Jupyter Notebook in Positron. Now, we can keep going through and looking a little bit more at the data, right? So we can see summaries, we can see, just numerical output. We can look at a correlation matrix documentation. We can, search for specific words inside of it. So like Pearson, and you can see that gets highlighted. Now we can also quickly compute a correlation matrix. We can reuse that correlation matrix that was done on a previous cell to create another graph. We can even do things with missing data in terms of creating a quick graph that basically shows where the observations are that have missingness associated with them. We can look at the actual percent of missingness by variable, everything that you might want. We can even use here statsmodels to quickly create a linear regression. This isn't really the best model, but it's a linear regression. You sort of sometimes like to see a regression, and lo and behold, we can also very quickly have another Seaborn plot where we're basically overlaying that regression line that we fit using statsmodels. So it's really, really nice to be able to use all of this technology. Now, one of the other things that I want to do is just also show that we can actually export this quite nicely. So if we use Command-Shift-P or Control-Shift-P, we engage what's called the command palette. And what we can say here is like export to, and we have options to sort of like export it to a PDF. And if I go ahead and I press enter, I'll be immediately taken into a save prompt. And then I'm just going to say export. And what'll happen on the lower right-hand side is notice it's basically saying we're exporting to PDF. I can go back up to that command prompt, and then I can say, export, in this case, to an HTML document. And then I can also save that as well. And what I'm going to say here is I do want to open, in this case, the exported HTML document. And lo and behold, you can really quickly see it looks just like a regular, a Jupyter Notebook that's been exported. If we go over into the Explorer, I can also launch here, basically this Penguin's notebook, right? When I say launch, what I mean really is I can effectively say that the notebook is present, but if I want to actually launch it, I have to go into Finder, double click on Finder, and then what I'll do is I'll just gently drag that over. And again, you can see that that works as well. So overall, very useful. Now there's one more option. So if we re-engage that command palette one last time using Command-Shift-P, or in this case, Control-Shift-P if you're on Windows, we can actually go to the export to Python script. However, when we go ahead and we go towards exporting as a Python script, what ends up happening is we get all of these tags inside of it, which basically spikes the level of, in this case, problems that are being detected. So again, this option is nice, but unfortunately inside of Positron, it doesn't seem to want to generate something that would be valid in terms of a runnable Py script. So for that reason, I'm going to just go ahead and close out of that exported file. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just gently move a backup script that I have, just to sort of give us a little bit of a taste, really, in terms of what's possible within basically PyScript, or not PyScript, sorry, a Python script file. There we go. So over here, right, we have that download file helper as before. If I go ahead and I press run code, what ends up happening is basically this entire piece of text that you see is immediately transported down below. And what we end up getting with that transport is basically a quick way of defining things inline. So this %% basically allows us to create cells exactly like you'd have inside of a Jupyter Notebook. Now, as we go down further, right, I can use Command Enter to automatically send lines individually into the console down below as I need to. So basically I've downloaded again the data, I've loaded Pandas for the session, I've read in the Penguins data file, and now I'm looking at the head of the Penguins dataset. If I go even further down, again, notice that when I look at the head of the data, I actually get really, really nicely formatted output inside of the console. So this is a genuine table appearing in the console. Now, if I go and I run the next line, which in this case is sort of focused on a plot, we see for the first time how Positron actually creates plots in the lower right-hand side. So basically what I have here is I have just a very quick plotnine graph. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run another piece of code that's going to create the matplotlib graph. And notice that after I run that code cell, basically I have an ability to go back and forth between here, one plot, and the next plot that I made. I can hide this feature, or I can force it to always appear. And each time that I make this change, what's happening is because I have auto, basically the plot's shape and size are going to be automatically determined, which is really, really nice. I can also save the plot, and I can copy the plot to clipboard as well. Now I'm going to scroll down a little bit more, and I want to even show you one last thing, which in this case is basically an interactive plot also works. And you can jump between each of these plots. The only downside here is this is basically a screenshot right now of what is currently in my Positron window. It isn't quite the exact interactive plot as it seems, but you really have the ability to work with these interactive plots just like if you were in a notebook or if they were in their own standalone web page, which I think is really, really cool and really, really useful overall. So in short, again, it's an amazing tool really for doing things with Python and R. It simplifies everything greatly. And if you have a chance, definitely take it out for a run. And then let me know if there's any issues that you encounter in the comments below. I'll try and help you out, or you can try and talk with the Positron folks over at the repository. All right, thanks for watching. Hope to see you in the next video. Bye now.